What starts as a fun, innocent night with friends can sometimes turn into something much more sinister. Tonight, we dive into a terrifying true story of a sleepover that took a dark and disturbing turn. Grab your blanket, turn off the lights, and make sure your doors are locked. Because this is a true disturbing sleepover horror story. It was a cool autumn evening. For friends Ella, Zoe, Sophie, and Grace had been planning their sleepover for weeks. They were all 15, eager to spend the night at Zoe's house. With her parents out of town, it was the perfect opportunity for a night filled with movies, snacks, and stories. Zoe's house was a large, old Victorian home, the kind that creaked and groaned with every gust of wind. It stood alone at the end of a quiet street, surrounded by towering trees that cast long shadows as the sun began to set. The night started off just as planned. They ordered pizza, laughed until their sides hurt, and picked out a few horror movies to watch. Movies they thought would be scary, but not too scary. They settled in, the glow of the TV casting flickering shadows across the room. But as the night wore on, something changed. The laughter began to fade, replaced by a growing unease that none of the girls could shake. It all started when Grace noticed something strange. As they were watching the movie, she kept hearing faint whispers, like someone was speaking just out of earshot. At first, she thought it was part of the movie, but the whispers continued even during the silent scenes. "Grace, did you guys hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The other girls paused, looking at each other with confused expressions. "Zoe, hear what?" "Grace, it sounded like whispering." Ella tried to laugh it off. "You're just freaked out by the movie." But deep down, creeping sensation that something wasn't right. They decided to shake it off and continue with their night, but the atmosphere had shifted. The once fun, carefree energy was now tense and uneasy. As they were getting ready for bed, Sophie went to the bathroom. On her way back, she passed by the hallway mirror and froze. Standing just behind her, reflected in the glass, was a dark figure. It was tall and shadowy, its features indistinct, but its presence was undeniably menacing. Sophie spun around, her heart racing, but the hallway was empty. She backed away slowly, her eyes never leaving the mirror, and rushed back to the living room. "Sophie, there's someone in the house," she gasped, her face pale. The other girls jumped up, fear gripping them as they looked around the dimly lit room. They quickly checked the doors and windows. They were all locked. "Zoe, are you sure you saw something?" Sophie nodded, her hands trembling. "It was in the mirror, right behind me, with no sign of an intruder." The girls tried to calm down, but the sense of dread was overwhelming. They huddled together in the living room, too scared to sleep, every creak and groan of the house sending them into a panic. Then, around 3 a.m., Ella felt something cold brush against her arm. She looked down, expecting to see one of the girls, but instead, she saw a hand, a pale, thin hand, reaching out from under the couch. Ella screamed and jumped back, causing the others to scream too. They quickly moved the couch, but there was nothing there, just an empty space where the hand should have been. "Zoe, we need to get out of here." Her voice was shaking, and the others quickly agreed. They grabbed their things and ran out of the house, not stopping until they were down the street, out of breath and terrified. They called their parents, who picked them up and took them home, but the fear lingered. The next day, Zoe's parents returned home. She told them everything that happened, but they were skeptical. They checked the house, but found nothing out of the ordinary. But the girls knew what they had experienced. It wasn't just their imaginations running wild. Something or someone was in that house with them that night. To this day, none of them know what it was. They've all tried to move on, but the memory of that night still haunts them. And Zoe, she never spent another night alone in that house again. Sometimes, the most innocent nights can take a turn for the terrifying. So, the next time you're at a sleepover, and the night seems to be just a little too quiet, remember this story, and stay safe. Story number 2. What should have been a night of laughter and fun turned into a night of terror. Gather around as we dive into the terrifying tale of a sleepover that went horribly wrong. Get comfortable, dim the lights, and prepare yourself. Because this is a true disturbing sleepover horror story. It was a warm summer night, and for friends Olivia, Zoe, Mia, and Harper had gathered for a sleepover at Zoe's house. They were all 14, eager to enjoy their summer break with snacks, movies, and endless chatter. Zoe's house was old, with creaky floorboards and dim lighting that gave it a spooky charm. The girls didn't mind though. They were more excited about having the house to themselves, as Zoe's parents were out for the night. The night started off just as they had planned. They made popcorn, watched a few comedies, and spent hours gossiping about school and crushes. By midnight, they were feeling brave enough to try something different, a seance. Olivia, the most adventurous of the group, had brought along an old Ouija board she had found in her grandmother's attic. It was dusty and worn, with faded letters and a planchette that creaked when moved. Olivia, come on, it'll be fun. Let's see if there are any spirits around. The other girls hesitated but eventually agreed. After all, it was just a game. Or so they thought. They dimmed the lights, lit a few candles, and gathered around the Ouija board. The room was filled with a tense silence as they placed their fingers lightly on the planchette. Zoe, is anyone there? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. At first, nothing happened. They laughed nervously, teasing Olivia about her haunted board. But then, slowly, the planchette began to move. Harper, who's moving it? Mia, I'm not. Their laughter faded as the planchette spelled out the word, HELP. The girls froze, staring at the board in shock. Olivia, this isn't funny, guys. Who's doing that? But none of them were. They could feel a cold draft sweep through the room, causing the candles to flicker. The temperature seemed to drop, and a strange, uneasy feeling settled over them. Zoe, who needs help? She asked, her voice trembling. The planchette moved again, this time spelling GETOUT. Before they could react, the door to Zoe's room slowly creaked open. The girls turned towards the door, their hearts pounding. The hallway beyond was dark, but they could make out a figure tall and shadowy, with glowing red eyes standing just beyond the threshold. Mia screamed, knocking over one of the candles as she jumped back. The flame flickered and went out, plunging the room into deeper darkness. Harper, turn on the lights. Turn on the lights. Zoe scrambled for the light switch, but when she flipped it on, the room remained dark. Panic set in as they realized the lights weren't working. The shadowy figure began to move closer, its red eyes fixed on them. The shadowy figure began to move closer, its red eyes fixed on them. The air grew thick with the scent of something rotten, like decaying leaves and damp earth. The girls backed up against the wall, too terrified to move. Zoe, we have to get out of here, she whispered urgently. But just as they were about to make a break for the door, the figure stopped and pointed towards the Ouija board. The planchette began moving again, faster this time, spelling out one final word. Are you in? Without another word, the girls bolted from the room, leaving the Ouija board behind. They raced down the stairs, their footsteps echoing through the empty house. The front door was just ahead. If they could just reach it, they'd be safe. But as they approached, the door slammed shut with a loud bang, locking itself from the inside. They were trapped. Harper, what do we do? She cried, tears streaming down her face. Olivia, thinking quickly, grabbed a nearby chair and smashed it against the window. The glass shattered, and they climbed out one by one, cutting their hands and knees in their desperate scramble to escape. They didn't stop running until they were far down the street, out of breath and shaking. When they finally looked back, they saw Zoe's house, dark and still, as if nothing had happened, but they knew better. The girls never spoke of that night again. Zoe's parents returned home to find the front door wide open and the living room in disarray. They were furious, thinking the girls had thrown a wild party, but they didn't know the truth. Zoe moved out of that house a year later, but the memory of that night still haunts her. Sometimes, she still dreams of the shadowy figure and those glowing red eyes. And she wakes up in a cold sweat, terrified that it's still watching her. Some things are better left alone. The next time you're at a sleepover and someone suggests playing with a Ouija board, maybe think twice. You never know what you might invite in. Story number 3. It was a stormy Friday night. For friends Mia, Zoe, Sophie, and Grace were staying over at Grace's house. The girls, all 13, were excited about spending the night together in Grace's large, old house. It was the kind of house that had been in the family for generations, with creaky floors, hidden corners, and an attic filled with forgotten memories. The girls decided to spend the night in the attic, where they could tell ghost stories and explore old family treasures. Grace had always been fascinated by the attic. It was filled with old furniture, dusty trunks, and items from decades past. As they explored the attic, Mia came across an old, ornate wooden box tucked away in the corner. Inside was a small, antique doll, dressed in a faded blue dress, with glassy eyes that seemed to follow you wherever you moved. The doll looked eerily lifelike, with delicate features and a slight smile that gave the impression it was hiding a secret. "Zoe, creepy, where did this come from?" she asked, eyeing the doll warily. "Grace, I don't know. I've never seen it before. It must have belonged to my great-grandmother or something." Despite the eerie appearance of the doll, the girls decided to keep it out as they continued their sleepover. They gathered around, telling ghost stories and eating snacks. But as the night went on, the atmosphere started to change. Sophie kept feeling as though the doll's eyes were watching her. No matter where she sat, the doll's gaze seemed to follow. She tried to ignore it, but the unease grew. "Sophie, this doll is seriously creeping me out. It's like it's staring right at me." The others laughed it off, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. They decided to put the doll back in its box, tucking it away in the corner where Mia had found it. But as they did, a loud crash echoed through the attic. One of the old trunks had toppled over on its own. "Mia, what the? How did that happen?" They all jumped, startled by the sudden noise. The girls exchanged nervous glances, but tried to brush it off as just an accident. As the night wore on, things only got stranger. The wind outside picked up, causing the house to creak and groan. The girls tried to settle in and sleep, but the attic felt unnaturally cold, and the air was thick with tension. Around 2 a.m., Zoe woke up to the sound of soft whispering. She sat up, looking around the dark attic, but the other girls were fast asleep. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, like they were coming from right beside her. "Zoe, hello, who's there?" she whispered, her voice trembling. There was no response, just the sound of the wind howling outside. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw the doll, sitting up right at the edge of the attic, its glassy eyes fixed directly on her. Zoe's heart raced. She distinctly remembered putting the doll back in the box. Slowly, she reached for her phone to shine a light, but before she could, the doll toppled over, landing face down with a soft thud. She scrambled out of her sleeping bag and woke the others, her voice shaky with fear. "Zoe, the doll, it moved. I swear, it wasn't there before." The other girls looked at the doll, now lying motionless on the floor, and felt a chill run down their spines. They decided they had enough. Grabbing their things, they rushed downstairs, leaving the doll and the attic behind. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. They decided they had enough. Grabbing their things, they rushed downstairs, leaving the doll and the attic behind. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. They fumbled with the lock, and just as Mia managed to get the door open, they heard a soft, eerie giggle coming from the top of the stairs. They didn't wait to see what it was. They bolted out of the house, not stopping until they were far down the street. Drenched from the rain, but relieved to be outside. They called their parents, who picked them up and took them home. None of them wanted to talk about what happened, but the memory of that night stayed with them. The next day, Grace's parents found the attic in disarray, with the doll lying on the floor, its glass eyes cracked and its dress torn. They assumed the girls had just been playing rough, but Grace knew better. The doll was put back in the box and buried deep in the attic, never to be touched again. But sometimes, when she's alone in the house, Grace swears she can still hear that soft giggle, echoing from the shadows. Some things are better left undisturbed. The next time you find something old and forgotten, maybe think twice before bringing it back to life. You never know what might be waiting in the dark. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more spine-chilling tales, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. We've got plenty more terrifying stories coming your way. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.